The deepest cuts are often dealt by the hands you trust the most. Sometimes the sharpest blades are wielded by those who once promised to mend your wounds, not inflict them. This is the story of how an ordinary man, leading a seemingly ordinary life, discovered that the foundations of his existence were built on a crumbling edifice of deceit, and how he rose from the ashes of betrayal, not with fury, but with cold, calculating precision. The first tremor of discord that shook Alexander Thorne wasn't the desolate quiet of his driveway, nor the chilling emptiness that pervaded his home upon his arrival. It was the scent, Serena's distinct, expensive perfume, an ethereal cloud of jasmine and vanilla, hung heavy in the foyer, cloying and invasive, much like the stale echo of cigarette smoke after a raucous party where no one recalled a single moment of genuine enjoyment. She was conspicuously absent, her return delayed by several hours beyond her usual time, and the fragrance itself felt too potent, too deliberately applied, as if sprayed not after homecoming, but precisely before departure. Alexander let his sturdy work boots fall with a dull thud near the entrance, and the ensuing silence felt like a physical weight, pressing relentlessly against his eardrums. Over 2 decades of shared life, 23 years of marriage, had honed his senses to distinguish between the simple state of being alone and the crushing reality of abandonment. This chilling emptiness undeniably resonated with the latter. His hands, still rough and stained with machine oil and minute metal shavings from an arduous 12-hour shift at Apex Industries, a sprawling manufacturing plant that had been particularly demanding today. 3 critical equipment malfunctions had crippled production, and Leo Sanchez's inexplicable absence had forced Alexander to cover both their stations, doubling his workload and stress. His shoulders ached with a deep, persistent throb. His lower back screamed in protest with every movement, and all he craved was the simple solace of a scalding hot shower, followed by whatever succulent leftover casserole Serena had promised to warm for him. Instead, he was met with an oppressive stillness and a creeping wave of suspicion that twisted his gut. Alexander moved through their modest ranch-style dwelling, his gaze falling upon myriad small details he had unconsciously overlooked or deliberately ignored for many months. The decorative cushions, usually askew from daily use, were now aligned with an almost unsettling precision on the living room sofa. The kitchen table, typically cluttered with his mail, tools, or spare change, was immaculately clear. Even the incoming mail was sorted and stacked with military-grade exactitude. Serena had always been known for her meticulous organization, a trait he once admired, but this extreme tidiness felt different, almost clinical. It was sanitized, as if she were systematically erasing any tangible evidence of his very existence within their shared space. The refrigerator hummed its familiar, monotonous tune, a comforting sound in its own right, but there was no casserole, no hastily scrawled note, no explanation whatsoever for her absence. He reached for a bottle of pale ale, twisting off the cap with a practiced motion, the sharp metal teeth biting into his calloused palm. Through the kitchen window, across the tranquil street, he could see the warm, inviting glow of Ms. Albright's living room light. He caught a fleeting glimpse of her husband settling into his favorite recliner, engrossed in the evening news, a picture of normal, comforting domesticity. Alexander's home was anything but. His phone vibrated softly against his hip, pulling him from his unsettling reverie. A text message. Working late. Don't wait up. S. Alexander stared blankly at the screen. There was no accompanying heart emoji, no customary love you, just a terse, almost business-like efficiency distilled into a mere 11 words. He scrolled through their recent exchanges, a cold dread coiling in his stomach, as he noticed the same disquieting pattern. Brief, almost transactional communications that read more like memoranda exchanged between distant colleagues than intimate conversations shared between two people who had built a life together. When, he wondered, had they stopped exchanging those simple, vital declarations of affection? What had the tender, love you, become an unspoken relic of a bygone era? The beer went down, smooth at first, then finished with a bitter, metallic aftertaste. He uncapped another bottle, the hiss of escaping carbonation loud in the oppressive quiet, and ambled into the living room, where an array of family photographs adorned the mantelpiece, each one a silent accusation. Serena on their wedding day, luminous and radiant in her pristine white gown. Chloe's high school graduation just last spring, her smile a little too fixed, and Serena's arm wrapped with a possessive tightness around their daughter's shoulders. Alexander himself stood slightly apart in that particular photograph, his factory uniform making him look rather like hired help, an afterthought at his own family celebration. Chloe, too, had become increasingly distant lately. At 17, she embodied the youthful conviction that the world was an endless buffet laid out solely for her consumption. She treated Alexander with a casual disdain, viewing him as an embarrassing relative who had long overstayed his welcome. Her college applications were haphazardly strewn across the dining room table, a collection of brochures for prestigious, expensive private institutions that would collectively cost more than Alexander earned in 2 years. When he had tentatively suggested more practical alternatives, a local community college or a reputable trade school, she had regarded him with an expression of profound disgust, as if he had proposed a life of destitution. "You simply don't understand, Dad," she had articulated, her voice laced with a condescending edge. "Some of us harbor grander aspirations than merely fixing machinery for the remainder of our existence." The words had cut him far deeper than he had anticipated, not solely because of their inherent cruelty. Chloe had, after all, become something of an expert in casual cruelty, but because he had heard those exact sentiments voiced by Serena just weeks prior during a phone call with her sister. Alexander finished his second beer, the bottom of the bottle clinking against the mantelpiece as he set it down, and checked his phone once more. Still nothing. It was nearing late evening now, and Serena's office had been closed for hours. Where on earth was she? He tried calling her mobile, but the call went straight to voicemail. Her professional, overly cheerful voice promised to return his call at her earliest convenience. The automated beep that followed felt like a sharp, personal rebuke. A flicker of anger, hot and swift like a match striking, ignited in his chest. He had been toiling away, working 60-hour weeks for months on end, relentlessly picking up every available overtime shift to help finance Chloe's increasingly ambitious college dreams and Serena's spiraling credit card debt. The very least his wife could do, he reasoned, was to come home for dinner, or at the very least, provide a genuine, unvarnished explanation for her prolonged absence. Or perhaps, he mused grimly, that was precisely the problem. Perhaps he had been so consumed by his relentless work that he had become utterly blind, missing the subtle, insidious signs of whatever was unfolding directly beneath his very nose. The familiar rumble of the garage door jolted him from his spiraling thoughts, and Alexander felt his shoulders involuntarily relax, a reflexive sigh of relief escaping his lips. Serena was home. They could finally address this unsettling quiet, clear the suffocating air, and attempt to revert to whatever semblance of normalcy still existed within their household. But the vehicle that slowly glided into the driveway was not Serena's modest white compact car. It was a sleek, silver sedan, a luxury model Alexander didn't recognize. Expensive, pristine, the kind of vehicle that belonged to individuals who wore tailored suits to their professions instead of protective goggles and grease-stained work attire. Alexander moved cautiously to the window, remaining hidden in the shadows, and watched as a man emerged from the driver's seat. Tall, effortlessly lean, he was clad in a charcoal overcoat that likely cost more than Alexander's monthly mortgage payment. Even in the deceptive gloom of the streetlights, the man exuded an aura of polished sophistication, an undeniable confidence, like someone who had never had to dirty his hands with honest labor in his entire life. The passenger door then opened, and Serena gracefully stepped out. She was laughing, truly laughing, genuine, unrestrained sound Alexander hadn't heard directed at him in months, perhaps even years. Her hand rested lightly, intimately, on the man's arm as they slowly, deliberately walked toward the front door. And she was gazing up at him with an expression Alexander vividly recalled from the nascent days of their own courtship, a potent blend of adoration and playful mischief. It was the very look that used to send his heart racing, a surge of adrenaline and profound affection. Now it made his stomach plummet, a cold, sickening drop. They paused on the front porch, bathed in the soft glow of the entry light, and Alexander, frozen in place, watched as his wife of 23 years tenderly kissed another man. It wasn't a perfunctory peck on the cheek or a polite, chaste farewell. It was a deep, unhurried kiss, hungry and intimately familiar, as if they had shared this profound gesture countless times before. The man's hands instinctively found Serena's waist, pulling her closer, and she melted into him with a fluid grace, the same way she had once melted into Alexander's embrace. Her fingers intertwined in his hair, and she emitted a soft, almost imperceptible sound that seemed to carry through the crisp night air like a whispered confession, a damning admission of infidelity. Alexander's beer bottle, now empty, slipped from his suddenly numb fingers and shattered with a violent crash on the polished hardwood floor. The jarring sound jolted him back to the harsh reality of the moment, and he frantically scrambled, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated, to clean up the shards of glass before Serena could enter. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he carefully gathered the larger pieces, and a jagged shard sliced cruelly across his palm, drawing a thin line of crimson blood. Perfect, he thought with a bitter irony. Now he would have to concoct an explanation for both the scattered mess and the fresh wound, all while pretending he hadn't just witnessed the agonizing demise of his own marriage on his very own front porch. But Serena did not come inside. The silver luxury sedan, its engine a low purr, slowly pulled away, carrying her with it, leaving Alexander alone in his silent, empty house, bleeding onto a kitchen towel, desperately trying to process the shocking tableau he had just witnessed. His wife was engaged in a full-blown affair, not merely an emotional connection or a professional friendship that had inadvertently crossed unspoken boundaries. This was a passionate, explicit liaison with someone who could effortlessly afford a car worth more than Alexander's entire annual salary. How long, he agonized, had this clandestine relationship been ongoing? How many of Serena's late nights at the office and working weekends had been meticulously constructed lies? How many times had Serena kissed him goodbye in the morning, knowing full well she would be kissing another man that very evening? And more importantly, what in the name of all that was sacred was he supposed to do about it? The front door opened with a soft click sometime in the deep hours of the night, long past midnight. Serena slipped inside with an almost imperceptible quietness, likely hoping he had already succumbed to sleep. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood as she made her way towards the stairs, but she paused abruptly when she spotted Alexander, seated motionless at the kitchen table, a fresh beer in front of him, his hand crudely bandaged. "You're still up quite late," she remarked, her voice carefully modulated, devoid of any discernible emotion. "So are you," Alexander replied, his own voice a flat, hollow echo. Serena's purse landed with a soft, muffled thud on the counter as she began her nightly ritual, the systematic removal of her jewelry, the casual checking of her phone. Everything about her posture, her stiff, guarded movements, screamed guilt, yet she was attempting to project an air of fatigued normalcy. "Long, long day at the office," she declared, her gaze studiously avoiding his. "Victor had us deeply engrossed in the Albright Industries account until almost 11. You understand how exceedingly demanding those high-profile corporate clients can be." "Victor?" So, the enigmatic man now had a name. "Your superior?" Alexander inquired, his voice unwavering. "Regional manager," Serena corrected, finally meeting his gaze, her eyes a swirling mix of defensiveness and a strange, brittle pride. "He has been exceptionally supportive of my career progression. Actually, he believes I possess significant potential for advancement within the company." The words felt unnervingly rehearsed, meticulously practiced, as if she had been refining this elaborate deception for weeks, perhaps even months. "That's truly commendable," Alexander stated, his voice devoid of any genuine enthusiasm. "It's always reassuring to have a supportive superior." Serena meticulously studied his face, her gaze piercing, searching for the slightest indication of suspicion, a fleeting tell that he might be onto her. When she found none, her shoulders relaxed imperceptibly, the tension draining from her posture. "I'm utterly exhausted," she announced, her voice now tinged with a feigned weariness. "I'm going to take a long shower and then head straight to bed." She leaned over, pressing a fleeting kiss to his forehead, a brief, perfunctory peck that felt more like a business transaction than an expression of affection, and then ascended the stairs. Alexander listened intently as the water began to run upstairs, the sound filling the cavernous silence of the kitchen, and tried to decide whether he should confront her immediately, strip away her carefully constructed lies, or meticulously gather more damning evidence first. Evidence. The word resonated with a chilling absurdity, making him feel like a private investigator delving into the depths of his own marriage. But perhaps, he conceded with a bitter internal sigh, that was precisely what it had been reduced to. Perhaps that was the inevitable consequence when trust slowly, imperceptibly eroded, until you awaken one day to discover that the very foundation of your shared life had utterly disintegrated. His phone lay on the table, a silent, dark rectangle of technology, and Alexander stared at it for a long, contemplative moment before making a swift, resolute decision. He opened Serena's laptop, which she had carelessly left charging on the kitchen counter. He was taken aback, a flicker of surprise crossing his face when it didn't prompt him for a password. Either she harbored an almost naive level of complete trust in him, or she had, in her burgeoning recklessness, grown increasingly careless. Given the devastating scene he had witnessed just mere hours earlier, he strongly suspected the latter. Her email client was already open, a window into her secret life, and Alexander felt like a voyeur, a trespasser in his own home, as he scrolled through her recent messages. Most were mundane, work-related correspondences, but interspersed throughout, like insidious weeds in a meticulously manicured garden, were intensely personal emails from someone identified only as the Reed from quantum-solutions.com. quantum-solutions.com. Victor Reed. Alexander clicked on the most recent message, sent just a couple of hours prior. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place, same time. I've been thinking about tonight all evening. You looked absolutely incredible in that dress." The dress. Alexander remembered it now, a sharp, painful jolt of recognition. Serena had purchased a new black cocktail dress just the previous week, claiming she needed something exquisitely professional for upcoming client meetings. She had even tried it on for him, twirling playfully in their bedroom like a giddy teenager preparing for a prom. He had told her she looked breathtakingly beautiful, as she had blushed, then kissed him with an unexpected tenderness, making him feel, for a fleeting, hopeful moment, that perhaps they still possessed something worth fighting for, something salvageable. Now, he knew with absolute certainty, the dress had been for Victor. Alexander scrolled back through the email chain, his heart sinking further with each successive message. 6 months of clandestine correspondence that had gradually escalated, beginning as professional exchanges, then morphing into deeply personal messages, then becoming overtly intimate, and finally, explicitly sexual. Lunch meetings had subtly transformed into romantic dinner dates. Weekend conferences, supposedly for professional development, were, in reality, surreptitious romantic getaways. Lies piled upon lies, accumulating into a towering edifice of deception, a structure tall enough to utterly crush everything Alexander had believed to be true about his life. The most recent messages were the most devastating of all. Detailed plans for Victor to divorce his wife and for Serena to leave Alexander. Discussions about a new apartment across town where they could both embark on a fresh start, unburdened by the inconvenient complications of their current lives. Even meticulous discussions about how to minimize the financial impact of their respective divorces, and, perhaps most damningly, how to delicately explain the sudden dissolution of Alexander's family to Chloe. Chloe, he realized with a sickening jolt, already knew. That much was brutally clear from an email, where Serena casually mentioned their daughter being surprisingly supportive of a nascent relationship, and her understanding that mom deserves to be truly happy. Alexander's hands trembled violently as he slowly closed the laptop lid. The betrayal was complete, absolute. His wife, his own daughter, and some nameless stranger named Victor Sterling had been meticulously plotting his destruction for months. And he, in his naive trust, or perhaps his sheer stupidity, had been utterly blind, failing to see the inevitable collision coming. The shower was still running upstairs, a steady, rhythmic hiss of water. Serena was likely indulging in her expensive body wash, the one she claimed was reserved solely for special occasions, preparing to slip into bed beside him as if nothing had fundamentally changed, as if she hadn't just spent the entire evening entwined in another man's arms. Alexander grabbed his car keys and, without another thought, walked out of the house. He drove aimlessly through the deserted, silent streets of Willow Creek, New Hampshire, past the shuttered storefronts and derelict, abandoned buildings that served as stark monuments to his town's slow, agonizing decline. The Apex Industries plant loomed in the distance, its towering smokestacks dark and inert against the cloudy, bruised sky. Even the factory, the steadfast symbol of his life's work, appeared weary, beaten down by years of relentless budget cuts and successive layoffs. Everything in Alexander's life, he mused with a profound weariness, felt precisely the same way. Worn out, thoroughly used up, discarded by people who had discovered something ostensibly better. He eventually found himself pulling into the dimly lit parking lot of the Iron Keg, a quintessential blue-collar dive bar that catered primarily to weary factory workers, long-haul truckers, and anyone else seeking cheap, unpretentious beer and an unspoken agreement of no questions asked. The parking lot was almost entirely empty at this late hour, but the neon sign in the window still buzzed erratically, flickering with a tired, persistent glow. George Miller was hunched over at the far end of the bar, nursing an amber whiskey and staring blankly at the muted television screen above the counter. Alexander had worked alongside George for 15 long years before a brutal workplace accident had cost George his left leg and, consequently, his job. Now, George subsisted on disability checks and spent the majority of his evenings at the Iron Keg, holding court with anyone willing to lend an ear to his endless anecdotes about better, more prosperous times. "Alexander," George called out, his voice hoarse but friendly, when he spotted his old friend. "What brings you out at this ungodly hour?" Alexander slumped heavily onto the adjacent bar stool and, without hesitation, ordered a double whiskey. The bartender, a grizzled, gray-haired woman named Brenda, who had been serving drinks at the Iron Keg since the era of President Reagan, poured the drink without uttering a single word, her expression unreadable. "Ah, marital discord," Alexander offered simply, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. George nodded sagely, a knowing, empathetic expression on his weathered face. "Been through that particular hell myself, pal. Want to unburden yourself and talk about it? Or should we just drink until the pain mercifully subsides?" The whiskey burned a fierce path down his throat, but it felt strangely good. Clean, honest, in a way that nothing else in Alexander's life had been lately. "She's involved with someone else," Alexander confessed, his voice a raw whisper. "Her superior. It's been going on for months." "Damn," George muttered, shaking his head slowly. "How did you uncover this rotten truth?" Alexander recounted everything, leaving out no detail. The countless late nights, the cryptic text messages, the sickening kiss on his own front porch, the damning emails. George listened intently, never interrupting, occasionally signaling Brenda for another round of drinks. "So, what's your next move?" George asked, his voice low and serious, once Alexander had finished his painful narrative. "I honestly don't know," Alexander admitted, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. "Part of me yearns to confront her, to strip away her lies. Another part wants to simply pretend I never witnessed a thing, to live in blissful ignorance. And a rather large part of me wants to track down this Victor fellow and beat him senseless." "None of those are particularly sound strategies," George observed with a pragmatic sigh. "Do you possess a more astute suggestion?" George took a long, thoughtful sip of his whiskey, considering the question with a furrowed brow. "My former spouse cheated on me," he began, his voice laced with a distant bitterness. "With my own brother, no less. You know what my immediate reaction was? I stormed over to their house and created an utterly spectacular scene. Screamed and yelled, threatened to violently end both their lives. And what, pray tell, did that achieve for me? A restraining order, a night spent in a jail cell, and a divorce settlement that left me with absolutely nothing but my measly disability checks. So, your advice is to simply endure it? To allow them to walk all over me, to literally steal my life away?" Alexander's voice was laced with disbelief. "I never suggested that, my friend," George replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I said making a public spectacle was foolish. But capitulating, surrendering completely, is even more foolish. If you intend to engage in this fight, fight with cunning. Strike them where it truly inflicts pain, not where it merely feels good to you in the moment." Alexander stared at his own reflection in the vast mirror behind the bar. He looked considerably older than his 42 years, worn down, almost desiccated by decades of relentless factory work and crippling financial strain. Threads of silver had begun to weave their way through his once dark hair, and deep lines creased the corners of his tired eyes. When he wondered with a pang of realization, Had he begun to resemble his own father so profoundly? You know what truly infuriates me the most? Alexander said, his voice quiet but intense. It's not just the infidelity itself. It's the meticulous planning, the chilling coordination. As if I were merely an obstacle they needed to circumvent, rather than a living, breathing person who deserved even a modicum of basic respect. That's because they no longer perceive you as a person, my friend, George stated, his voice devoid of emotion. You're a convenient paycheck, a mere convenience, something to be managed and tolerated until they can finally trade up to something ostensibly better. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they resonated with a terrifying, irrefutable truth. Serena had been treating him like a mere roommate for months, polite but emotionally distant, sharing a physical space but no genuine intimacy. And Chloe had been treating him like a source of perpetual embarrassment, something to be endured rather than cherished. "So what's this smart play you speak of?" Alexander asked, his voice barely a whisper. George's lips curved into a slow, knowing grin. And for a fleeting moment, he looked precisely like the cocky, formidable young man who had once effortlessly outworked everyone on the factory floor. "The intelligent strategy is patience," he declared. "Allow them to believe they are winning, that they have succeeded in their deception, while you meticulously gather intelligence. Document absolutely everything. Systematically build an irrefutable case. Then, when you are perfectly poised to make your move, you strike them with such devastating force that they will never, ever see it coming." Alexander finished his whiskey, the warmth spreading through him, but something cold and sharp settled deep in his chest. It wasn't anger. Anger, he now understood, was a hot, impulsive emotion that inevitably led to restraining orders and regret. This was something entirely different. Calculation. Purpose. "I'm going to require assistance," he stated, his voice firm. "I know an attorney." George replied immediately, his eyes twinkling. "A genuinely exceptional one, too. She was in the military before she pursued law school. She rarely, if ever, loses a case, and she harbors a particular, almost passionate disdain for cheating spouses. Her name is Eleanor Vance." Alexander silently committed the name to memory. Tomorrow, he would begin the arduous process of constructing his case. Tonight, he would return to his home and pretend to sleep soundly beside his deceitful wife, while he meticulously planned her ultimate downfall. The drive home consumed a mere 15 minutes, and Alexander utilized every second of that time to practice his expression, meticulously crafting a look of utter surprise and heartbreak for the inevitable moment when Serena would eventually confess her affair with Victor. He needed to embody the image of the grieving, utterly shocked husband who had never, ever seen this devastating betrayal coming. At least, not until he was fully prepared to reveal the true extent of what he actually knew. The house was cloaked in darkness when he pulled into the driveway. Serena's car sat in its customary spot, and upstairs he could discern the faint, ethereal glow of her phone charger. She was likely texting Victor, meticulously making plans for their clandestine rendezvous tomorrow. Alexander slipped inside quietly, moving with the stealth of a phantom, and made his way upstairs. Serena was already asleep, or, he suspected, expertly pretending to be, curled on her side with her back turned toward his side of the bed. The new black dress, the one for Victor, hung prominently in the closet, a silent, damning piece of evidence, and her phone rested on the nightstand within easy reach. He changed into his pajamas and quietly slid into bed beside the woman who had once solemnly vowed to love him forever. She stirred slightly, a soft murmur escaping her lips, but she did not awaken. And Alexander lay there, listening to the rhythmic cadence of her breathing, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, as he meticulously planned his revenge. Tomorrow would mark the inception of a new phase. No more trusting husband, no more convenient paycheck, no more easy target. Tomorrow, Alexander Thorne would finally begin to fight back. The morning arrived far too soon, announced by the harsh, insistent buzz of Alexander's alarm at an ungodly hour. Serena groaned audibly and instinctively pulled a pillow over her head, burying herself deeper under the covers. But Alexander was already wide awake. He had, in fact, been awake for countless hours, his mind relentlessly churning through myriad scenarios and potential strategies, much like a seasoned general meticulously preparing for a momentous war. Far too early, Serena mumbled indistinctly from beneath her pillow fortress. The factory, regrettably, does not concern itself with the time, Alexander replied, playing his role flawlessly. The dependable husband, the predictable, diligent worker, the man who could always be counted upon to show up and remain silent. He showered, dressed in his work clothes, and grabbed a cup of coffee and a granola bar for his meager breakfast. Serena remained resolutely buried under the blankets, likely already contemplating when she could discreetly text Victor without arousing any suspicion. Let her believe she's safe, he thought, a cold resolve settling in his heart. Let her believe he's still the same trusting fool who never questioned her late nights or her sudden new wardrobe. The drive to Apex Industries consumed a consistent 20 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that appeared to have definitively abandoned any aspirations of prosperity sometime in the distant 1980s. Boarded-up windows, overgrown, neglected lots, and chain-link fences topped with menacing razor wires served as stark reminders of a faded dream. This was what remained of the American dream after the factories began their relentless exodus and the good, stable jobs moved overseas. Yet, Apex Industries continued to operate, a stubborn beacon of employment, still providing livelihoods for 300 individuals who desperately needed steady paychecks and reliable health insurance. The company manufactured essential industrial components for automotive suppliers. Not glamorous work, certainly, but undeniably necessary, honest. The kind of work that once sufficed to comfortably support a family, purchase a house, and send children to college without crippling debt. Now, it barely managed to cover the mortgage and the ever-accumulating credit card bills. Alexander punched his time card at precisely the designated hour and made his way to Station 7, where massive sheets of raw steel lay waiting to be meticulously cut, expertly shaped, and precisely welded into transmission housings. The work was undeniably repetitive, mind-numbing even, yet it demanded a particular, unwavering skill. Angles had to be exact, every weld had to be flawless, and quality control meticulously scrutinized every single piece before it progressed down the production line. He had been performing this exact job for 18 long years, ever since Chloe's birth, when he had transitioned from less stable construction work, which often paid better but vanished during the harsh winter months, to a steadier, more reliable income. 18 years of punctual attendance, of willingly working overtime whenever requested, of silently observing younger, less experienced men receive promotions while he remained perpetually rooted in place. Perhaps Chloe was right. Perhaps some individuals were indeed destined for grander achievements than merely repairing machines for the remainder of their lives. But perhaps, he mused with a growing bitterness, some people were also meant to be steadfastly loyal and unflinchingly honest, and to diligently uphold their solemn promises, even when those promises were never reciprocated. "You appear utterly dreadful," Ben Carter remarked, settling into the adjacent station. Ben was a mere 26, freshly graduated from trade school, and still harbored a boundless optimism that factory work would somehow provide a comfortable, secure future. Give him another 10 years, Alexander thought grimly. Give him a wife who yearns for more than he can realistically provide, and a daughter who is deeply ashamed of how he earns his living. Long night, Alexander replied succinctly, fitting his safety glasses over his eyes. Serena keeping you up? Ben grind, aig's full, innocensmemil. It must be rather pleasant to have a wife who still desires to spend her time with you. Mine invariably falls asleep watching streaming shows by 9 o'clock. Alexander almost chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. If Ben only knew precisely how Serena was actually spending her nights, he might not be quite so envious. The morning dragged on with agonizing slowness, each identical piece of steel demanding the same precise measurements, the same meticulous cuts, the same perfect welds. Mindless, monotonous work that paradoxically left Alexander's thoughts free to wander, to roam through the labyrinthine corridors of a shattered life. He found himself contemplating Eleanor Vance, the attorney George had enthusiastically recommended. Would she even accept his case? What astronomical cost would such an endeavor entail? How protracted would the entire legal process prove to be? More importantly, what ultimate outcome did he truly desire? Divorce was the obvious, perhaps even the inevitable, conclusion, but that would simply leave Serena free to ride off into the metaphorical sunset with Victor, while Alexander was left with a mountain of legal bills and a desolate, empty house. That, he decided with a cold, hard certainty, did not feel like justice. That felt like gracefully conceding defeat while attempting to masquerade it as some hollow moral victory. No, Alexander craved more than a mere divorce. He yearned for devastating consequences. He wanted Serena and Victor to viscerally comprehend that all actions carry a price, and he wanted to be the one to present them with the final, crippling bill. The lunch whistle shrieked at precisely noon, and Alexander utilized the break to immediately call the number George had provided. Eleanor Vance answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. Vance Legal Offices. Ms. Vance, my name is Alexander Thorne. George Miller provided me with your contact information. I urgently need to consult with someone regarding a divorce. I see, Eleanor replied, her tone neutral but attentive. Are you contemplating filing, or has your spouse already initiated proceedings? Neither, as of yet, but I possess compelling reasons to believe she is preparing to. I wish to be comprehensively prepared. Astute thinking, Eleanor commended. How well-versed are you in the intricacies of New Hampshire divorce law? Completely ignorant, I'm afraid. Then we must absolutely speak in person. Can you manage to come in this afternoon? I have an opening at 3 o'clock. Alexander checked his watch. He could easily leave work early, concocting a plausible excuse, a dental appointment, or an urgent family emergency. After 18 years of impeccable attendance, he had undoubtedly earned a modicum of flexibility. I will be there, he stated firmly. Eleanor Vance's office was situated in a beautifully converted Victorian house, a mere 15 minutes' drive from the factory. The surrounding neighborhood was clearly struggling, yet was undeniably fighting back, exhibiting a tenacious resilience. Small, independent businesses, burgeoning art galleries, and quaint coffee shops were valiantly attempting to inject new life into a district that had unequivocally seen better days. It was the kind of place, Alexander mused, where people still harbored an unwavering belief in second chances. Eleanor herself was strikingly younger than Alexander had anticipated, likely in her late 30s, with a sharp, intelligent face framed by short auburn hair and piercing, astute green eyes. She wore a tailored navy suit that bespoke competence without a hint of ostentation, and her handshake was firm enough to reassure him without feeling overtly challenging. Coffee, she offered, gesturing toward a comfortable chair positioned directly across from her impressive desk. "Please." Alexander accepted, his voice hoarse. The office was meticulously professional, yet exuded a palpable warmth. Imposing law books and overflowing case files shared space with cherished family photographs and various military commendations. Alexander noticed a Purple Heart reverently displayed in a shadow box behind her desk. "Iraq," Eleanor explained, catching his fleeting glance. "2 tours. I learned an immense amount about strategy and patience during that time, both of which have proven remarkably useful in the demanding field of family law." Alexander proceeded to tell her everything, starting with the devastating discoveries of the previous night and painstakingly working backward through months of his wife's increasingly suspicious behavior. Eleanor took copious notes without a hint of judgment, occasionally interjecting with a clarifying question, but mostly just listening with an unwavering intensity. "Have you confronted your wife about any of this yet?" she asked once he had finished his painful recitation. "No. I wanted to fully understand my options first." "Good instincts," Eleanor approved with a nod. Direct confrontation invariably leads to defensiveness, and defensiveness, in turn, often results in cunning asset hiding and baseless false accusations. It is far more advantageous to diligently gather irrefutable evidence while they still labor under the false assumption that they are safe, that their deception remains undiscovered. Eleanor pulled out a fresh legal pad and began to meticulously sketch the intricate outline of a comprehensive strategy. New Hampshire is a no-fault divorce state, which means that adultery, in itself, will not directly influence the basic dissolution of a marriage. However, it can significantly impact spousal support, the division of marital assets, and custody arrangements. If we can conclusively prove that your wife has been systematically using marital assets to finance her illicit affair, we can argue for substantial reimbursement. If we can demonstrate that she has been meticulously planning to leave you for another man, we can vigorously challenge her claims to any future financial support. What about their respective jobs? Alexander pressed, a flicker of cold interest in his eyes. Can I pursue professional repercussions against him? That depends entirely on company policy and the precise nature of their relationship, Eleanor explained. Many employers maintain strict anti-fraternization rules, particularly for supervisors and their subordinates. If we can definitively prove that he's been granting your wife preferential treatment, or, more egregiously, utilizing company resources for personal benefit related to their affair, we might possess solid grounds for formal complaints to human resources or even civil action against him. Alexander felt a grim, almost imperceptible smile tug at the corners of his lips. This was precisely what George had meant by fighting smart. "How much will this entire endeavor cost?" he asked, the practical reality setting in. "My retainer is $5,000, Eleanor stated plainly. "After that, it's $300 an hour for my time." "But Alexander," Eleanor leaned forward, her intelligent green eyes fixed on his, her expression profoundly serious. "I need to be unequivocally clear about something. Revenge, while often emotionally gratifying, is an exceedingly expensive endeavor, both emotionally and financially. Sometimes, the truly intelligent thing to do is to simply walk away with whatever you can salvage and embark on a new life somewhere else." "I have no interest in walking away," Alexander stated, his voice resonating with an unshakable resolve. "I am profoundly interested in ensuring they pay for the extensive damage they have wrought." Eleanor studied his face for a long, contemplative moment, then slowly nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his determination. "In that precise case, we need to proceed with extreme caution. No confrontations, No angry, accusatory phone calls, no dramatic public scenes. You return home, act completely normal, and let them remain utterly convinced that they are winning, while we meticulously build our case. Can you commit to that? I can commit to that, Alexander affirmed. Eleanor handed him a crisp business card and a detailed list of immediate tasks. Photograph all important financial documents, meticulously monitor joint accounts, document every instance of suspicious behavior, and above all, avoid doing anything that could possibly be construed as threatening or unstable. She paused at the door as Alexander stood to leave. One more crucial thing, she added, her voice softening slightly. You mentioned your daughter, Chloe, is aware of the affair. That particular detail is going to significantly complicate custody arrangements. Are you mentally prepared for the very real possibility that she might choose to live with her mother? The question struck Alexander with a force far greater than he had anticipated. Chloe had been distant lately, undeniably, but she was still his daughter, his flesh and blood. The agonizing idea of losing her, of her being entangled in Serena's web of lies, felt almost worse than the profound pain of losing his wife. She's 17, he finally managed to say, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. Old enough to make her own choices, yes, Eleanor acknowledged, her voice tinged with a weary understanding. And old enough to be manipulated by adults who should, frankly, know much, much better. Just keep that crucial fact in mind as we diligently move forward. The drive back to the factory provided Alexander with ample time to meticulously process the weighty information he had just absorbed. The legal route, he understood, would be a protracted, arduous journey, spanning months, perhaps even years. It would undoubtedly be an exorbitant and emotionally draining ordeal, and there was no absolute guarantee that he would achieve the precise outcome he desired. But it was undeniably infinitely better than doing nothing at all, better than meekly rolling over and accepting defeat like a broken, subservient animal. He returned to work and completed his shift without incident, meticulously focusing on the mechanical precision of his tasks, allowing his mind to calmly work through the longer-term strategies Eleanor had outlined. His co-workers noticed nothing amiss. Alexander had always been known for his quiet demeanor and unwavering focus. The archetypal employee who diligently performed his duties without drama or complaint. Tonight, however, that outward facade would begin to subtly shift, at least on the surface. Tonight, he would return home and diligently pretend to be the trusting, unsuspecting husband while he commenced the painstaking process of documenting his wife's profound betrayal. The house was permeated with the inviting aroma of dinner as Alexander stepped through the front door. Something distinctly Italian, rich with the pungent scent of garlic and fragrant herbs, made his stomach audibly growl despite the tight, persistent knot of tension coiling in his chest. Serena was in the kitchen, casually stirring a simmering sauce, looking utterly domestic in a way that would have genuinely warmed his heart just 24 hours prior. Now it felt like an elaborate, meticulously choreographed performance. "How was your day at work?" she inquired, her gaze remaining fixed on the stove. "Same as always," Alexander replied, maintaining his calm facade. "Something smells delightful." "Chicken parmesan," Serena announced. "I thought we could finally have a nice, quiet dinner together for once." Together? The word felt profoundly loaded with a bitter irony. When, he wondered, was the last time they had genuinely shared a meal without the constant drone of the television, the pervasive distraction of their phones, or Chloe's incessant complaints about her social life? "Where's Chloe?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She's at Isabella's house, studying," Serena explained. "Big chemistry test tomorrow. Or perhaps," Alexander mused, Chloe was simply providing her mother with the necessary privacy for whatever clandestine plans she had meticulously arranged. Alexander was beginning to perceive conspiracies everywhere, and unervingly, some of them were undoubtedly real. They ate dinner like a perfectly normal married couple, engaging in mundane, almost trivial discussions about utility bills and tentative weekend plans. Serena was noticeably chattier than usual, almost manic in her fervent determination to meticulously maintain the illusion of normalcy. She inquired about his day, complimented his appetite with an almost forced enthusiasm, and even laughed, a little too loudly, at one of his weak attempts at humor. All of it felt hollow, utterly scripted, as if she were desperately attempting to convince herself as much as him that their marriage was still, somehow, worth preserving. After dinner, Serena retreated to the living room with her laptop, claiming she urgently needed to finalize some reports for tomorrow's crucial meeting. Alexander meticulously cleaned the dishes, attempting to project the image of a devoted, unsuspecting husband rather than a man meticulously planning an intricate legal offensive. "I'm going to take a shower," he announced around 9 o'clock. "Okay, honey," Serena replied, her voice distracted, her gaze still fixed on her screen. Honey, when, he wondered with a bitter pang, was the last time she had addressed him with such a term of endearment. Alexander grabbed his phone and locked the bathroom door firmly behind him. Instead of showering, he immediately opened the camera app and began systematically photographing everything Eleanor had instructed him to document: joint bank statements, intricate credit card bills, insurance policies, and the official deed to their house. What he discovered was unequivocally worse than he had ever anticipated. Serena had been spending money with an alarming, almost reckless abandon, like someone who knew with absolute certainty that she would not be present to face the inevitable financial consequences. New, expensive clothes, lavish dinners at upscale restaurants, exorbitant hotel charges from distant cities where she had claimed to be attending legitimate business conferences. The credit card bills alone totaled more than $8,000 in the past 3 months alone. Money they simply did not possess. Money that should have been diligently allocated towards Chloe's college fund or their desperately needed retirement savings. Alexander photographed every single suspicious charge, every unfamiliar restaurant receipt, every hotel bill that inexplicably corresponded with Serena's supposed work trips. The accumulating evidence was overwhelming and utterly infuriating. His wife hadn't merely betrayed him emotionally. She had been systematically stealing from their shared future, pillaging their joint resources to finance her illicit affair. The bathroom door rattled suddenly as someone attempted the handle. Alexander, Serena's voice, laced with a faint curiosity. "Are you all right in there?" "Fine," he called back quickly, his voice a little too loud, swiftly closing the camera app on his phone. "Just checking some work emails. Take your time. I'm heading to bed soon anyway." Alexander then actually took a shower, allowing the steaming hot water to cascade over him, washing away the raw, corrosive rage that threatened to overwhelm his meticulously maintained facade. Tomorrow, he would email the damning photos to Eleanor. Tomorrow, he would commence the construction of a case that would utterly dismantle Serena's complacent plans for a comfortable, amicable divorce. But tonight, he would lie beside her in expertly feigned sleep while she texted her lover and meticulously planned their shared future together. When he emerged from the bathroom, Serena was already in bed, her phone clutched in her hands, her fingers typing rapidly. She looked up briefly when he entered and offered him a faint smile, the first genuinely warm smile she had bestowed upon him in weeks. "Good shower?" she asked. "Yeah, really needed it," Alexander replied, his voice deliberately flat. He climbed into bed and settled on his side, his back deliberately facing her. Behind him, he could hear the soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of her fingers on the phone screen, undoubtedly recounting to Victor the details of the nice dinner she had meticulously prepared for her unsuspecting husband, likely laughing about how effortlessly easy it was to fool the dumb factory worker. Let her laugh, he thought, a cold, hard resolve solidifying in his chest. Let her believe she's winning. In 6 short months, she would learn the agonizing difference between winning and merely surviving. The subsequent few days settled into a disconcerting routine of meticulous surveillance and carefully manufactured normalcy. Alexander diligently went to work, returned home, ate dinner, and flawlessly played the role of the devoted, oblivious husband while he systematically gathered irrefutable evidence of his wife's profound betrayal. Serena, meanwhile, continued her affair with an escalating boldness, staying out later and later, offering increasingly flimsy, transparent excuses for her protracted absences. She was growing careless, intoxicated by the exhilarating thrill of deception, utterly convinced that Alexander was simply too dull-witted or too blindly trusting to discern what was truly happening. It was precisely what Eleanor had accurately predicted. Cheaters, she had stated, always believe themselves to be inherently smarter than everyone else, right up until the precise moment their meticulously constructed world violently imploded. On Thursday evening, Alexander made his decisive move. Serena was ostensibly at yet another late meeting with Victor, and Chloe was at a friend's house, leaving Alexander alone in the house with his wife's laptop and a lifetime of accumulated computer skills. Breaking into her email account took him less than 5 minutes. Serena, in her arrogance, had saved all her passwords, likely for convenience, but perhaps Alexander mused with a grim satisfaction because she subconsciously reveled in the illicit thrill of potential discovery. What Alexander uncovered far exceeded his bleakest expectations. The affair had been ongoing for a grueling 8 months, not merely 6. Victor was, in fact, married with 2 teenage children, yet he had been promising to leave his wife for Serena since as far back as March. They had embarked on numerous weekend trips to Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia, charging every single expense to credit cards that Alexander, the unwitting husband, would ultimately be responsible for settling. Worse yet, they had been meticulously planning his financial destruction with a chilling, almost surgical precision. Victor, it appeared, was remarkably well-versed in divorce law, asset protection strategies, and methods for concealing income. He had been actively advising Serena on how to strategically position herself for maximum spousal support, while simultaneously minimizing Alexander's legitimate claims to their joint marital property. The most damning email of all was dated just 3 days prior. The key, Victor had written, his words oozing with manipulative cunning, is to make him appear unstable. If we can meticulously document erratic behavior, anger management issues, or financial irresponsibility on his part, the court will undoubtedly be far more sympathetic to your position. You, my dear, are the victim of an unhappy marriage with an unreliable provider. I, on the other hand, am merely the supportive colleague who helped you finally realize that you truly deserve better. Serena's chilling response was even worse. He's been drinking more lately, she had typed callously. Coming home late, acting suspiciously. I actually suspect he might be having his own affair, which would be absolutely perfect for our case. Chloe is already fully on board with the narrative. She's tired of his negativity and his controlling behavior. This could genuinely work out even better than we had initially hoped. Chloe was on board. His own daughter was actively participating in a calculated campaign to systematically destroy his reputation and brazenly steal his assets. The betrayal was so complete, so breathtakingly cruel in its scope that Alexander found himself physically unable to continue reading. He needed air urgently. The October night air was crisp and clear, with distant stars faintly visible despite the pervasive glow from the factory security lights. Alexander sat heavily on his front porch step, struggling to process the sheer magnitude of what he had just uncovered. This wasn't merely an illicit affair. This was a conspiracy, a cold, coordinated attack on everything he had diligently worked for, everything he had believed to be irrevocably real. But it was also, he realized, evidence. Legal, meticulously documented, time-stamped evidence that would utterly dismantle any shred of sympathy a court might conceivably harbor for Serena's position. Adultery, asset dissipation, blatant parental alienation, and outright fraud. Eleanor Vance, he thought with a grim satisfaction, would have an absolute field day with this material. Alexander pulled out his phone and, with a newfound sense of purpose, began forwarding screenshots to his lawyer's secure email address. Every message, every insidious plan, every cruel joke made at his expense. Let them believe they are intelligent, he thought, his lips curling into a predatory smile. Let them believe they have him all figured out. Tomorrow, he would unequivocally show them just how devastatingly wrong they truly were. Friday morning brought the season's inaugural snowfall. Fat, lazy flakes that melted almost immediately upon contact with the still warm pavement. Alexander watched from the kitchen window as Serena diligently scraped ice from her car windshield, bundled snugly in the expensive winter coat she had purchased just last month. Another previously unexplained acquisition that now, suddenly, made perfect sense. She waved goodbye through the window, playing the role of the loving wife one final time before driving off to spend the day in the arms of her lover. Alexander waved back, his smile genuinely sincere for the first time in weeks. Today was the day everything would irreversibly change. His phone rang, just as Serena's car disappeared around the corner. It was Eleanor Vance. "It's Alexander. I sent you those emails last night. Did you have an opportunity to review them?" "I did." Eleanor's voice was taut, brimming with a controlled, righteous anger. "Alexander, this is arguably some of the most damning evidence I have encountered in 15 years of legal practice. They have meticulously documented their entire conspiracy in writing. So we can use it." Alexander pressed, his voice sharp with anticipation. "We can destroy them with it." "Absolutely," Eleanor affirmed. "But I need you to listen to me with extreme care. No more self-initiated investigations. From this moment forward, everything goes through me. These individuals are actively planning to paint you as unstable, which means any aggressive behavior on your part plays directly into their manipulative hands." Alexander felt his jaw clench, a muscle twitching involuntarily. "So, I just continue to pretend everything is perfectly fine while they systematically rob me blind?" "For now, yes," Eleanor conceded, "but not for much longer. I am filing for an emergency preservation of assets this afternoon. Serena will be rendered unable to access your joint accounts or make any significant purchases without explicit court approval. I am also formally requesting a forensic accounting of all marital funds expended in the past year." "What about Victor?" Alexander inquired, a predatory glint in his eyes. "That, Alexander, is where things become exceedingly interesting," Eleanor revealed. "I conducted some preliminary research into quantum solutions. They possess a notoriously strict anti-fraternization policy, particularly concerning managers and their subordinates. If we can conclusively prove that he has been exploiting company resources to facilitate his affair, we can file formal complaints with both Human Resources and the State Labor Board." Alexander felt something cold and incredibly sharp settle deep within his chest. Not anger. Anger, he reminded himself, was a hot, impulsive emotion that often led to foolish mistakes. This was something else entirely. Calculation. Purpose. How long until we make our move? Monday morning. Eleanor replied, her voice crisp and decisive. Can you maintain the facade of the devoted husband for 3 more days? I can do whatever is necessary, Alexander stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Good, Eleanor affirmed, because once we embark on this path, there will be no turning back. Are you absolutely certain this is the outcome you truly desire? Alexander thought about the damning emails, the insidious lies, the 8 long months of meticulous planning for his destruction. He thought about Chloe, his own daughter, labeling him controlling and negative while she actively participated in orchestrating his downfall. He thought about Victor Sterling's hands on his wife and their shared, contemptuous laughter at his expense. I'm sure, he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The weekend passed in a surreal haze of carefully manufactured normalcy. Serena was uncharacteristically attentive, cooking elaborate meals and enthusiastically suggesting they watch movies together. She even initiated intimacy on Saturday night, the first time in many months. But Alexander found himself utterly unable to respond to her touch. Every caress felt like a lie. Every kiss tasted of betrayal and deceit. Chloe arrived home Sunday evening, laden with attitude and an expensive coffee, treating Alexander like an inanimate piece of furniture while she regaled Serena with detailed updates on her weekend activities. At 17, she was increasingly becoming a younger, more refined version of her mother. Beautiful, effortlessly manipulative, and utterly convinced that she deserved something far superior to whatever life had thus far bestowed upon her. Dad, she said during dinner, her gaze pointedly avoiding his, Isabella's parents are taking her to visit colleges next weekend. Can I go? Which colleges? Alexander inquired, his voice carefully neutral. Ivywood University, Metropolitan College, maybe Riverbend Institute. Chloe rattled off dismissively. You know, actual schools with real programs. The dig was subtle, yet undeniably intentional. Alexander had tentatively suggested she consider State University or Coastal College, both excellent institutions that would not necessitate massive student loans. But those, it seemed, were not sufficiently prestigious for Serena's daughter. How much will it cost? Alexander asked, his voice flat. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. God, Dad, do you honestly have to reduce everything to money? This is my future we're talking about. Your future that I will be paying for, Alexander replied quietly, his voice laced with a subtle warning. Maybe not, Chloe muttered under her breath, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. The words struck Alexander like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp impact. His daughter wasn't merely participating in Serena's insidious conspiracy. She was actively looking forward to his financial ruin. In her mind, he was already gone, already irrelevant to whatever grand life she and her mother were meticulously planning. Serena shot Chloe a sharp, warning glance, but the damage was irrevocably done. For just a fleeting moment, the carefully constructed mask had slipped, and Alexander had glimpsed the true, chilling extent of what his family truly thought of him. The trip sounds exceptionally educational, Serena interjected quickly, her voice a little too bright. I truly believe we can manage the expense. We, as if she harbored any genuine intention of still being married to him by the time the astronomical bills inevitably came due. Monday morning arrived with a brutal, unyielding clarity. Alexander kissed Serena goodbye as always, told Chloe to have a productive day at school, and drove to work with crucial legal documents meticulously hidden in his glove compartment. At precisely 10 o'clock, while Serena was presumably ensconced in her Monday staff meeting, Eleanor Vance would stride into the courthouse and officially file the papers that would summarily freeze their joint accounts and formally request an emergency hearing. The initial shot in a war Serena didn't even realize had begun. Alexander's phone rang at 10:47 a.m. "What on earth did you do?" Serena's voice was shaking, a chaotic mixture of raw rage and sheer panic. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean," Alexander replied, expertly maintaining a tone of calm confusion. "The bank just called me. They said our accounts are frozen. Something about a court order and asset preservation. Did you know about this?" "Frozen? That simply doesn't make any sense." Alexander feigned confusion. "Perhaps there's been some kind of dreadful mistake." "This is not a mistake, Alexander. Someone filed legal papers against me." "Against us? Who would do something so malicious?" Alexander allowed the agonizing silence to stretch for several torturous seconds, deliberately building the unbearable tension. "Perhaps," he finally stated, his voice chillingly calm, "someone who knows about you and Victor." The line went dead with an abrupt click. 30 seconds later, his phone vibrated again, demanding his attention. This time it was Chloe. "Dad, what on earth is wrong with you?" she shrieked hysterically before he could even utter a greeting. "Mom is crying uncontrollably at work, and everyone's staring at her, and you've utterly ruined everything." "Have I?" Alexander asked, his voice unwavering. "Or did I simply decide to stop allowing people to walk all over me?" "You're sick. You're a sick, controlling freak who simply cannot stand to witness anyone else's happiness. I hate you. Do you comprehend that? I hate you, and I never, ever want to see you again." She hung up abruptly, without waiting for a response. Alexander stared blankly at his phone and felt something profound shatter within him. Not his heart, that had been slowly, agonizingly breaking for many months. This was different. This was the final, fragile thread of sentimentality, the ultimate connection to the man who had tirelessly striven to hold his family together through relentless love, ceaseless sacrifice, and a deliberate, almost willful blindness. That man, he realized with a stark clarity, was now irrevocably gone. What remained was colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. His phone buzzed softly with a new text message from Eleanor. "Hearing scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Serena's attorney is scrambling, completely unprepared for aggressive action. Stay calm and allow me to handle absolutely everything." Alexander smiled for the first time in days. The war had officially begun, and he was already winning. Tuesday brought an unexpected, yet welcome, reinforcement. George Miller called during Alexander's lunch break with news that profoundly altered the entire trajectory of his developing case. "Remember that friend of mine who works at Quantum Solutions?" George said, his voice a low rumble. "He's been discreetly asking around about your wife's superior, Victor Reed. Turns out, Victor Reed possesses quite the unsavory reputation." "What kind of reputation?" Alexander asked, his pulse quickening. "The kind that involves multiple harassment complaints and quiet settlements with former female employees," George divulged. "Apparently, he's been shamelessly using his position of authority to coerce vulnerable women into illicit relationships for years. The company has been systematically covering it up to meticulously avoid any damaging public scrutiny or bad publicity." Alexander felt a surge of cold triumph. "How solid is this information?" "Solid enough," George confirmed. "My friend personally knows 2 women who accepted substantial payouts rather than going public with their stories. He believes there might be others." Would they be willing to testify? Alexander pressed. Perhaps, if they believed it would finally bring him down permanently. George mused. These women have been carrying this painful secret for years, silently waiting for someone with sufficient, irrefutable evidence to make a compelling case stick. Alexander immediately called Eleanor and relayed what George had learned. The attorney's excitement was palpable, her voice crackling with barely contained energy. This changes absolutely everything, she declared. If we can conclusively prove a pattern of harassment and egregious abuse of power, we can argue that your wife was, in part, a victim rather than an entirely willing participant. That doesn't excuse her behavior, certainly, but provides us with significant leverage to negotiate a settlement that meticulously protects your assets. I don't want to protect her, Alexander stated firmly. I want justice. Sometimes, Alexander, those two concepts are precisely the same thing, Eleanor replied sagely. Allow me to make some calls. Wednesday night, Alexander returned home to find Serena frantically packing suitcases in their bedroom. She looked up briefly when he entered, her face streaked with tears and smeared makeup. I'm leaving, she announced, her voice raw and hoarse. Where are you going? Victor's place, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We simply can't continue pretending this marriage is salvageable. Alexander sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and watched his wife fold clothes with visibly shaking hands. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, almost shrunken by the overwhelming weight of her accumulated deceptions. How long have you been meticulously planning this? He asked, his voice calm, devoid of anger. Serena stopped packing abruptly and stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You knew. I knew. How long? Long enough, Alexander stated simply. The pertinent question now is, what are you going to do? Serena sank slowly into the armchair by their bedroom window, suddenly appearing far older than her 39 years. I truly didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. Victor and I, we just connected. He understands my ambitions, my true potential. He makes me feel like I could actually be something more than just a factory worker's wife. And what, pray tell, is wrong with being a factory worker's wife? Alexander countered, his voice steady. Nothing, Serena retorted quickly, perhaps a little too vehemently. But it's simply not enough for me anymore. I yearn for more than this house, this town, this life. I want to genuinely matter. And I don't matter? Alexander asked, his voice barely a whisper. Serena looked at him with an expression that might have been pity. You matter, Alexander, of course you do. But you are content with mediocrity. You've given up on your dreams and your ambitions and have simply settled for whatever life has handed you. I can't do that anymore. The words stung deeply, not because they were entirely untrue, but because they contained a painful grain of truth. Alexander had indeed given up on certain dreams, but not by choice. He had willingly sacrificed his own ambitions for the sake of family stability, traded exhilarating adventure for the quiet comfort of security, deliberately chosen their needs over his own desires. Every single decision had been made with love, but apparently love in itself was simply not enough. What about Chloe? He asked, his voice still carefully controlled. She's coming with me, Serena stated. She understands that this is truly for the best. Does she understand that Victor is married? Alexander pressed, his voice rising slightly. That he's been exploiting company resources to fund your affair? That he has a documented history of harassment and abuse? Serena's face went utterly pale, her composure crumbling. That's not true. Which part isn't true? Alexander pushed, his voice like ice. The wife and children he conveniently forgot to mention? The blatant expense account fraud? or the undeniable pattern of coercion that is about to become widely public knowledge? Serena stood up abruptly, knocking over a bedside lamp in her panicked haste. You're lying. You're fabricating this entire story to hurt me. Alexander calmly pulled out his phone and showed her the damning screenshots Eleanor had meticulously gathered. Victor's marriage certificate, his children's birth certificates, the official harassment complaints filed with Quantum Solutions Human Resources Department. Your knight in shining armor isn't quite what he appears, Serena, Alexander said, his voice devoid of emotion. He's a predator who has been systematically using his position to manipulate vulnerable women for years. You, my dear, are simply his latest victim. Serena stared at the irrefutable evidence with growing horror. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That can't be right. He loves me. He's going to leave his wife for me. When? Alexander countered, his voice dry. He's been promising that for 8 months, but his wife doesn't even know you exist. Check his social media, Serena. Look at the family photos from last weekend. Does that truly look like a man planning a divorce? Serena frantically grabbed her own phone and began typing, her fingers trembling. Her face crumpled visibly as she scrolled through Victor's social media profile. Images of family barbecues, anniversary celebrations, vacation photos with his unsuspecting wife and children. A portrait of a happy family man with absolutely no intention of altering his comfortable circumstances. He told me he was separated, she said weakly, her voice filled with dawning horror. He told you what you desperately wanted to hear, Alexander replied, his voice devoid of sympathy, just like he told the other women before you. Serena sank back into the armchair, her half-packed suitcase forgotten, abandoned on the floor. I've utterly destroyed everything, she said finally, her voice thick with tears. My marriage, my family, my reputation, and for what? For a man who was merely using me. Alexander felt an unexpected, almost unwelcome, wave of sympathy for his wife. Anger and profound betrayal were far easier emotions to contend with than pity, but watching Serena slowly realize the horrifying magnitude of her self-deception was almost physically painful. It doesn't necessarily have to be the absolute end, he said carefully, his voice surprisingly gentle. We could explore counseling, attempt to work through this together. Serena looked at him with genuine surprise, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief. After everything I've done, after the lies and the financial deception and the meticulous planning, you would still be willing to try again? Alexander honestly considered the poignant question. Could he truly forgive her? Could he ever trust her again? Truly? Could they genuinely rebuild something real and lasting from the fragmented wreckage of their marriage? I don't know, he admitted, his voice raw, but we could try to discover if it's possible. Serena remained quiet for a long, contemplative time, her gaze fixed on the street outside the window, the street where they had resided for 15 years. Finally, she slowly shook her head. It's too late, Alexander. I've gone too far to ever truly come back. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure I even want to. Whatever I felt for Victor, whatever he truly was or wasn't, it showed me that I'm not happy here. I haven't been genuinely happy for years. Then what do you want? I want a divorce, she stated, her voice firmer now, tinged with a newfound clarity. A fair one. No more games, no more manipulation. Just a clean break, so we can both unequivocally start over. Alexander nodded slowly. He had anticipated this outcome. He had even meticulously prepared for it. But hearing the actual words still felt like the resounding thud of a door closing irrevocably on half his life. Okay, he said, but we proceed with absolute honesty. No more lies, no more elaborate schemes. And Chloe gets to choose where she wants to live, without any pressure from either of us. Agreed. They shook hands, formally, like business partners concluding a significant transaction. Formal. Final. The end of 23 years of shared life reduced to a polite, unspoken agreement. Serena finished packing her remaining belongings and loaded her car while Alexander sat on the front porch, watching neighbors pretend not to notice the raw domestic drama unfolding directly across the street. Ms. Albright waved tentatively from her kitchen window, likely wondering if she should approach with a casserole or simply mind her own business. Alexander, Serena stood beside her overloaded car, looking smaller and far more vulnerable than he had seen her in years. I'm truly sorry for all of it. You deserved so much better. So did you, Alexander replied, his voice soft but firm. We both deserved far better than what we settled for. Serena drove away without a single backward glance, leaving Alexander utterly alone with a house full of cherished memories and a future fraught with exhilarating uncertainty. He should have felt a resounding sense of triumph. His meticulously crafted legal strategy had worked perfectly, brilliantly exposing Victor's elaborate deception and forcing Serena to confront her stark reality. But the victory, he realized, felt profoundly hollow when it inevitably meant dismantling everything he had spent decades diligently building. The house felt distinctly different without Serena's presence. Quieter, undeniably, but also more honest. No more pretense. No more walking on eggshells. No more wondering when the next agonizing betrayal would inevitably surface. Just silence and vast, open space to painstakingly figure out what came next. Alexander's phone rang around 8 o'clock. Chloe's number appeared on the screen, but when he answered, it was Victor Sterling's voice that greeted him, thick with barely concealed fury. We need to talk, the other man stated without preamble, his voice clipped and demanding. I don't believe we do, Alexander replied, his voice calm, almost leisurely. Your wife has been maliciously spreading lies about me. Vile, defamatory lies that could utterly destroy my career and my family. I demand that you make them stop. Alexander felt a cold, slow smile spread across his face, chilling him to the bone. Which particular lies would those be, Victor? The ones about your other clandestine affairs? The documented harassment complaints? Or perhaps the solemn promise to leave your wife that you never, ever intended to keep? You don't know what you're talking about. Victor sputtered, his voice laced with panic. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, Alexander corrected, his voice resonating with a quiet authority. I also happen to know that your company is currently launching a full internal investigation based on compelling evidence my lawyer meticulously provided. How do you honestly believe that's going to work out for you, Victor? Silence descended on the other end of the line, thick and suffocating. What do you want? Victor finally managed to rasp, his voice defeated. I want you to stay unequivocally away from my family, Alexander stated, his voice like cold steel. I want you to accept full responsibility for your reprehensible actions. And I want you to understand, with absolute clarity, that there are profound consequences for treating people like mere disposable objects. And if I don't, Victor's voice was barely a whisper. Then you, Victor, will discover precisely how much damage an angry factory worker can inflict when he chooses to fight with cunning and intelligence instead of fighting fair. Alexander hung up without waiting for a response. The click of the phone final, definitive. Thursday's hearing proceeded even better than Alexander had dared to hope. Victor failed to appear, likely on the astute advice of his own lawyer, and Serena appeared genuinely contrite, her voice quiet as she testified about the financial improprieties that had systematically drained their joint accounts. The judge, a stern, unyielding woman, was utterly unsympathetic to claims of love and passion when they came at the direct expense of meticulously managed marital assets. Eleanor had prepared thoroughly, presenting compelling evidence of every single unexplained expense, every suspicious clandestine trip, every solitary dollar that had been illicitly diverted from crucial family needs to finance an illicit affair. The numbers were unequivocally damning. Nearly $15,000 in marital funds brazenly spent on luxury hotels, upscale restaurants, extravagant gifts, and illicit travel that benefited only Serena and her lover. Mrs. Thorne, the judge stated sternly, her gaze piercing, you will be required to provide full restitution for any marital assets dissipated during your extramarital relationship. The court also finds sufficient evidence of asset concealment to warrant a comprehensive forensic accounting of all financial records from the past year. Serena's face went chalk white. Full restitution would necessitate her liquidating her retirement account and quite possibly taking out substantial loans to repay money she had already irresponsibly spent. The forensic accounting would expose every single hidden expense and eliminate any lingering hope of claiming ignorance about their family's perilous financial situation. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice resonating with authority, given the compelling evidence of parental alienation meticulously presented by Mr. Thorne's counsel, the court is ordering mandatory family counseling for all parties involved before any final custody arrangements are solidified. Mrs. Thorne, your daughter's active participation in planning this deception is deeply troubling and strongly suggests that professional intervention is absolutely necessary. Alexander glanced briefly at Chloe, who sat in the gallery beside Serena's sister. His daughter looked younger than her 17 years, overwhelmed by the harsh adult consequences of choices she had likely perceived as mere teenage rebellion. Maybe there was still a glimmer of hope for their fractured relationship. Maybe counseling would help her truly understand the profound difference between simply supporting her mother and actively participating in a deliberate deception. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor was practically radiant with satisfaction. That couldn't possibly have gone better, she declared, her eyes sparkling. The judge was clearly outraged by their egregious behavior. Serena's attorney looked as if he yearned to simply vanish in a thin air. What happens next? Alexander asked, his voice calm. We negotiate from a position of overwhelming strength, Eleanor explained. Serena urgently needs money to fulfill her restitution obligations, which means she will have to be eminently reasonable about asset division. As for Victor Sterling, his problems are just beginning. His company called me this morning to schedule a pressing meeting about his employment status. Alexander felt a grim, quiet satisfaction settle over him. Not happiness, precisely, but a profound sense that justice, after a long, arduous journey, was finally being served. And Chloe, he asked, a faint hope in his voice. Family counseling will undoubtedly help, Eleanor assured him gently. She has been profoundly manipulated by adults who should have steadfastly protected her from this painful situation. With time and dedicated professional guidance, Alexander, you might very well be able to rebuild your relationship.